everybody. Welcome to HackerKast. This is where we spend a few minutes talking about all the interesting things that happen in the application security world today. And there is a lot of stuff. We actually have a lot of stuff to talk about. I say we just jump into it and just get going. This week we saw, let's see, Google had a cross-site scripting, a persistent cross-site scripting vulnerability in something called Rich Snippets. Robert, you were looking at this one, right? This one's kind of cool sounding.
Yeah, so there's this SEO expert who's like, hey, when I type in stuff in a very particular context, it ends up on Google sort of underneath the link, underneath the title. It's like a little description about my website. It's like, I wonder if I put JavaScript in there, what that would do. And sure enough, it pops JavaScript on Google.com.
Oh,
so persistent cross-site scripting. I mean, you have to search for his site to get it. He's got to show up in the search results, but that's easy enough to craft the URL to get people to go there. So Google flips out, immediately bans his site, says it's a spam site, and of course the guy's like, no, it's I'm not even doing anything bad. I'm just trying to prove it's possible. They finally unbanned his site.
Did he? I guess he doesn't get a bounty because he didn't disclose it to them. But
No.
How did they see it? How did they see it?
Because he posted on his website. He's an SEO guy, so every SEO guy in the world's like, "Oh my God, look at this!" Including all of Google, right? They're like, "Oh, it's horrible." So,
oh man, he missed out like on $5-10 grand for that thing.
Oh, totally. But way overreacted for sure.
So there's nothing special about it. He just put code into a HTML code in a Rich Snippet.
That's exactly all he did.
How did no one find that ahead of time?
I don't think a lot of security experts are looking at things like Rich Snippets. I mean, honestly, not even a lot of SEOs look at that stuff. It's pretty, it's a pretty esoteric area of search engine result pages. There's a lot of places too that are very similar. Like YouTube links will sometimes show in there. Descriptions will show up in there. Sometimes like weird other people's descriptions will show up in there of your page. So I mean, it's weird how things end up on Google.
So it just goes to show those little obscure areas, gold lurks. So for the bug bounty hunters, get on it, guys.
The funny part about stuff like that, like landing zones like that, is that even like something like CSP doesn't fix that because it's actually loading from Google.com.
Right.
It's not like untrusted JavaScript. It's like, no, even though the code is coming from somewhere else, at the very last moment, it looks like it's unfurling almost from Google.com. And so Google looks at it and says, yeah, no, this is our JavaScript. Go ahead.
I mean, technically they could block inline scripts, but then that'd block all their own stuff. So yeah, it's definitely there's really no good answers there.
So then we also had another great web vuln. This one on Delta Airlines that it sounded like was this 0-day, but it was one where you could tamper a URL and see other people's reservations. I think Matt, you were looking at this one, right?
Yeah. So as a Delta loyal, this really worried me. So I don't really understand the attack scenario here fully. Maybe one of you can kind of enlighten me, right? So the attack itself is I can just rotate like a URL of my boarding pass like on my phone, right? Like they give you the QR code, and it's just in your browser, and if you just rotate the URL, you can just get someone else's boarding pass and then get on the plane, right? So the reason I don't really get the attack scenario is that if someone gets on the plane as you, and then you go to get on the plane, and you just pull out your driver's licenses, and that's it, right? But
there's actually a better version of the same attack where you can actually change their seat assignment. So if everybody was in first class or whatever, you can bump them all back to capital class, and then you're like, well, I'll just.
There was that part. Okay, so basically, this is what landed Weave in jail. Like, this is the exact same thing. Just rotate some number in the URL, and that landed Weave in jail for doing that to Apple.
I'm pretty sure that's not the only reason Weave ended up in
jail. This is the same hack, though. If we're going to call it a hack, this is the hack.
I guess it could have been funny. I mean, you could have like rearranged the aircraft and things like that. I think you should sit next to this person. It would be better for you. You guys really should get to know each other.
That's right. Boy, girl, right?
But it seemed like Delta was all over this one and fixing that one quickly, so that was good.
I would have liked this vuln as I sat like this, squeezed between two people that should have bought two seats for themselves for 4 hours. My last flight. This is where I sat like this in the middle.
So, but yeah, this is one of those vulns. It just the way it read, it looks like one of those vulns we find every day at White Hat. So yeah, those vulns are out there even on the biggest and best websites. So let's talk about another one. Let's see. There was the Sands Casino. They were, as the headline said, hacked very, very badly. Bad guys were brute forcing the VPNs, but at the end of the day, they got hacked through a web application. Robert, you were looking at that one, right?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of detail about this, so we can speculate a little bit, I guess. But basically, they tried a bunch of different brute force attacks against the VPN service, and I think it lasted several days of just over and over, just trying and trying. And they weren't able to get anywhere, or I think at that point the SANS security team went like, what the hell, and they started blocking it or whatever. So they shifted and they looked at other stuff, and it turns out that they had this old staging server hanging out that was just kind of like where they put their test scripts or whatever, and totally vulnerable, unpatched, whatever, and they just broke right in, and that's sitting on the same LAN. It doesn't really matter if it's staging or not, right? Same access to all the internal stuff, so they pivoted and broke in and did a lot of damage.
It kind of fits with the narrative that we see from the Verizon data breach report that it's not always the primary sites. It's not often even the primary websites that get hacked through a web application. It's always the secondary and tertiary websites, the ones everybody forgot. And that seems to be like one of the leading problems in AppSec for most organizations is that, one, they don't have enough AppSec talent nearly and not enough to go around, but two, they don't really know what websites they own. So if you don't know what you own, you can't secure it, and this got the casino.
If you don't know what you own, you're going to get owned.
Uh-oh, I think we have a t-shirt.
Too long to be a hashtag. Sorry, Robert.
Let's see, we got the next one here. Google proposes to mark HTTP as insecure in Chromium/Chrome. So this is interesting. This is something that was put forth by the Chromium team that, in their opinion, everything should be HTTPS, everything should be SSL, and all internet traffic should be encrypted, specifically on the web. And I don't think you'll find anyone outside maybe perhaps law enforcement or the intelligence community that would disagree. So everybody would like having things encrypted all the time. But it's going to be really interesting how they're going to shuttle an alert to users that say the connection that they're on is insecure. But it's not a whole lot that they can do. Like, you're warning the user that the connection is insecure, but I don't understand like what the user is supposed to do about it.
That's a very good question. But it has huge implications for everything we work on because I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why you'd want to deliver stuff over insecure connections because you really just don't care, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be secure. Like, there's all kinds of like basic brochureware sites that just, that just doesn't matter whether it has something bad on it or not, As a man in the middle could do all kinds of gnarly things. Why would they care about your crappy little brochureware sites? Unfortunately, I think that there's also a lot of sites that are much more dangerous than people realize. If they get man in the middle or something bad happens, it's much more dangerous. But really, all we're talking about is man in the middle. When you're talking about SSL, that's all we're talking about. So I think the really interesting implication is for all the other advertisers. I think part of this comes down to Google doesn't really like companies like AT&T and Comcast and Verizon man-in-the-middling the connection and inserting ads.
Oh, you think that's what it is? You think that's a driver?
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, I think it's all about ads.
That's good. For better or worse, though, I mean, at least in that regard, we're seeing a slow march on the deprecation of clear text on the web, and that's a good thing. Yes, it's probably in Google's best interest, but it's still a good thing.
Absolutely.
I think even though a user can't do anything, okay, you're going to go to a website, it's going to be on HTTP, Google's going to say, hey, this is insecure, right? And like, what do you really do about that as a user? Like, why is it being warned to you, right? Just having that mindset change, right? Just having like the users start to realize, okay, unless it is on HTTPS, I have to realize that it is, insecure, that it can be snooped upon. So just a mindset attitude change for non-security people. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. And but then we have more Google stuff, and this is kind of related to the browser. Actually, really related to the browser. We have Eric Schmidt making comments about the NSA and incognito mode. So, Robert, why don't you walk us through what exactly he said?
So I'm just going to have to quote him because that's the best way to do it. Quote.
Wait, but who is this Eric Schmidt guy anyway?
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry. So he's the board of directors, I think, is his new title, right? Board of directors.
I think he's chairman of the board, former CEO.
Chairman of the board, former CEO of Google.com. Quote, if you're concerned for whatever reason you do not wish to be tracked by federal and state authorities, my strong recommendation is use incognito mode, and that is what people do. So that whole man-in-the-middle thing you were just worried about, apparently incognito mode, and you're good to go.
So immediately following that quote, I saw at least one Chrome browser person that works at Google facepalm on Twitter like hardcore. So I say for our purposes here, we stand in solidarity with them.
I mean, seriously, how can he seriously say that? I mean, either he's completely delusional or that guy needs a serious lesson. I mean, he's the same guy who said if you don't have anything to hide, then you don't have nothing to fear. You know, I mean, that is straight from the Stasi. That is straight, like, Nazi propaganda talk. No, seriously.
It's incognito, man. It's incognito.
It's totally bizarre. Not to mention the fact that the NSA has actually used Google.com or DoubleClick.com, which is owned by Google Cookies, for this whole like tracking federal states by federal and state authorities. And incognito mode, at best, if you blow it away, fine, and you restart it, maybe that's not longer correlated, as long as you're not using the same IP address, which everyone always is. It's just ridiculous.
So I was hoping Google or Eric or Mr. Schmidt there would backtrack a little bit on it and say their browser's not quite that secure. White Hat, we do have a more secure browser that does incognito mode by default. It's called Aviator, so that's a little bit better. But I don't think we'll be as brazen enough to say this solves all your NSA woes.
Absolutely not. I mean, there are so many different ways to track somebody. In fact, I'm working a little bit with Runa over at Tor to carry sort of this gigantic list of all the ways people have been de-anonymized over Tor, and whether it's been Tor's fault and it's fixed, whether it's Tor's fault and it can't be fixed, or whether it's OPSEC related or some sort of third-party thing that happened that made them get de-anonymized. Because I think it's really important for people to know like how dangerous Tor really is if they're going to rely on it to protect themselves from all of that stuff.
So to move on a little bit and cover our last story here, one of the ones that was interesting because let's say the whole world is SSL, the browsers, and all those things. To end this on a high note, there's the headline, 12 million routers are now insecure by virtue of a cookie. I think, Matt, you were looking at this one. This is a special place in our heart, routers, 12 million of them.
I love router hacking. I love it. But I find this headline kind of funny, right? It says 12 million routers now insecure. And I'm gonna go back real quick. This is jumping ahead a little bit in the story. The vulnerable code that was written and put in the firmware of these routers was written in, guess when?
2004?
2002. Dude, this firmware was written in 2002. The thing that's scary is that this isn't home routers we're talking about. That's what made this a little bit more interesting.
Oh, I thought we were talking about home routers. What are these routers?
This is ISP-owned residential gateway routers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that's why this is a little bit more interesting because, 12 million home routers isn't actually that big of a number when it comes to router hacking. We see that's why I was like, 12 million, whatever, now vulnerable. Come on, no, all of them are vulnerable, right? Maybe not to this bug, but all of them are vulnerable. Just go look at Brazil. Brazil gets hacked like constantly. Every home router in Brazil just constantly gets whacked by CSRF flashing their firmware, right? Just worms take over that whole country. So this is residential gateways. So 12 million, that's actually a pretty good number of residential gateways.
So what was the hack specifically? What did the bad guy have to do? And is there a way for anybody to protect themselves?
Sure. So it's across manufacturers. So it's firmware on D-Link and TP-Link and ZTE and all these different other ones. And it's a cookie. The hack is via a malformed malicious cookie. And so you just send one HTTP packet to this router with this malformed cookie, and boom, you get remote code execution admin privileges on, and you can just corrupt memory on the device. So this code was written in 2002. It was fixed in 2005. The code was fixed in 2005, but devices manufactured in 2014 still have the 2002 code on it.
Software supply chain issue.
Yeah. So the problem with firmware vulns is that there's nothing they can do. They're reliant on the consumer on the other end to actually flash their firmware.
So the fact that it's a cookie is actually kind of neat, because if it were pretty much anything else, it would actually be harder to exploit. But a cookie is kind of cool because I can have a domain like www.attacker.com, and I can set this malicious cookie, and then I can have a sub with a domain set to it for my domain, attacker.com, and then I can redirect to www.attacker.com that points to the IP address of that vulnerable machine, so I can have other people go there and they'll be sending the malicious cookie, because cookies can be sent for my entire domain, not just my subdomain.
Sure, that's interesting. Yeah.
So I mean, one of the ways, I guess, if I was a black hat guy and part of a botnet, I mean, I'd be sending these malicious cookies all over the place to compromise routers. I mean, it's so simple, just blast.
Yeah, it looks like they did an internet scan. These researchers at Checkpoint did an internet scan. That's where they found the 12 million devices, 189 countries.
You may not be able to, depending on how it's set up, oftentimes you can't connect to them remotely. You have to connect to them internally. So the way I described it is actually the way you'd want to exploit it, or using malware. If you compromised one machine inside that network, you can force them to connect back out, which is, it's actually better to, it sounds like you're not getting very much, but you're actually getting persistence on the entire network instead of just persistence on one machine in the network. So either of those two ways, I think, is probably how it would actually be attacked.
So sorry, it says in most countries the vulnerability rates hover around 10%, but in one country it was half of the internet users in country are vulnerable.
And I think we're just reading about, that new feature that's going to the browsers, the TCP UDP feature that's going in. Use that with a little bit of DNS rebinding, and you get a winner.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but you don't even need DNS rebinding. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of this. If it were something you had to read from it, yeah, you'd have to do DNS rebinding. But with a cookie, you don't have to read. You don't have to do that. It's so much easier.
Jared, next to this attack with the UDP attack from last week, would that fit your characteristics of sophisticated?
We'd have to go down the list. Yeah. It might be, actually. It might be. But that's web security for this week. Who knows what I have next week. Guys, thanks very much. We'll hit everybody then.
Take it easy, guys.
Bye.